This bonus series was launched in cooperation with SIX Swiss Exchange. It focuses on the companies that completed the first Sparks IPO Academy course, a 6-month fast-track IPO training program designed for high-potential scale-ups.
The first wave, to be honest, it's, we were like, okay, we're not going to do a lot of work for 3 months. We have a good balance sheet. We have some cash. Okay, we'll lose money for 3 months and then we'll just move on. Then that's June, then the summer happens, second wave in the fall. Then, you're like, oh shit.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvain.
Sebastien, very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be in Zurich. My family comes from here, but so happy to be here.
Welcome back in that case. You're the CEO at MCI Group, a global next-generation platform for marketing. Before we talk about your impressive family business, I actually want to start with your personal background. You studied finance and international business at the Northeastern University in Boston. So my first question is, how did your time in the US shape and also change you?
I think, the US studies was really made for me because it has a different way of learning than Europe. If I take a little bit of an extreme scenario, I remember my friends, they were studying their books and learning formulas by heart. Mm-hmm. And in the US, when you go to a test, you can take your book. Because in real life, you have your book.
Of course.
So that's what I really enjoyed, this aspect of responsibility and accountability and just like in real life kind of philosophy.
It's much closer to what you then also do in business afterwards. So is it preparing you in a better way for the business world afterwards?
So it's in a way with entrepreneurship, yes, because also in the US, you have only 10 to 15 hours of classes per week, but there's double or triple of homework. Mm-hmm. So it teaches you to take your own future in your hands.
Very motivating in that regard.
You have to be.
And when you were studying in the US, was entrepreneurship on your mind as a career choice at all? Because I imagine that this would be a bit more common in the US than in Switzerland, for example.
So it's true. So I have to say I'm half Canadian. So I had already this North American kind of, go for gold, go for California kind of, mindset. But definitely it supported that philosophy. Yeah.
And when you were studying there, did you envision that you would one day become an entrepreneur yourself, or were you also evaluating other options like, consulting or investment banking or anything of that sort?
I mean, to be honest, I was a little bit innocent. I was just living through. I was already so happy to study in the US. It was my dream, and then I had an aunt in California. I was going to go there and then, to see what happens next. So I was not really thinking that way. But, when I think back at my life, I think, I set up a band the first day I bought a guitar. I didn't know how to play. So probably I had this, go-getter and an initiator mentality from the beginning.
You also mentioned on your LinkedIn that you actually started your first venture when you were just 7 years old. Can you talk a bit more about that? Because it seems that entrepreneurship really runs in your DNA.
Yeah, so that was, of course, the story before that. So I told the music band story. Mm-hmm. But before that, with my friend, we liked to draw cartoons. And, we decided, let's start a company. I'm going to look for sponsors and I'll do the legal. You're going to do the creative. So we're, having fun, 7, 8 years old. Yeah. But so definitely, again, like I said, when I look back, there are hints when you look back at your history of what you become.
Right. And in that regard, the MCI Group is a family business. It was founded in 1987 by your father, by Roger. And how was that for you to grow up in this family business? I imagine coming from an SME family myself, the business is always present, right? That's a huge part of your life and also of your family life.
So it was, but I'd never really realized what it meant to own a business because my grandfather was a career person. So he was also working a lot all the time, a very high level job in the travel industry. So I already saw him work a lot. So I didn't really make a difference. So it's only in 2006, I think it was, I have a friend who invited me to an association called Young Entrepreneur Organization that I discovered the word, actually. Although I was already an owner, but I didn't realize I was an entrepreneur. It's really something that came late to me.
And how was your childhood looking then? You know, like when your dad was building the business, did he also talk about that on like, you know, family dinners and lunches, for example?
So for sure, it was on the agenda, right, on the dinner, but not more than that. You know, we like to work hard and play hard. So, you know, when we were with family, we had fun. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when it was time for work, you know, I went to school and I guess he went to work. Yeah. But we had really a good time when we were together.
Would you say also what you just mentioned before with your grandfather also working really hard? Was work an important piece? Like it had a high standard, a high role in your setup, the way that you grew up? It was important to work hard.
So that's a very good question. I always remember my dad told me very young, he said, you have to work hard, but with everything that you gain from working hard, it's so you're happy and have fun in life. So the objective was not to work hard. The objective was a means to an end, which was having a happy life. Yeah. And work was a means to having a happy life and enjoying life.
I can imagine that sometimes this balance is not that easy to strike, right? Because sometimes you have to work much harder than you want to and have a bit less fun in life. And sometimes it can also be the other way around. How do you balance the two between working hard and having fun in life?
So those who know me, they know I'm pretty intense. I wake up early, I go to bed late. So I'm always, you know, at 200 miles an hour. So I guess it's part of me. I have a lot of energy and I don't really personally feel that difference or any kind of pain around that. Of course, there's bad days, but there's also good days. And then I'm lucky that my family, my wife, the kids, they respect and understand and, you know, leave me to do what I have to do.
So it's a whole support system also that is important in that regard.
Absolutely. We're a team. I always say it. We're a team with my wife, and I think this is our success.
And you then actually, after your studies, you started working in the family business. Was that an easy decision, that it was very clear for you to actually start working there immediately? Or was that something that you also thought about, whether it's the right move for you?
So, of course, I thought about it a lot. And about 2 years before I made the move, I remember having a meeting with my father. And he says, hey, you just have to tell me in 2 years when you finish, are you coming to work in the business or are you going to California as you planned? Yeah. And he says, you have to give me an answer in 2 weeks. So wow. Then, you know, 2 weeks later, I just thought about it. I was like, yeah, okay, I'll come to Switzerland. So we'll see what happens. And, you know, it was very innocent, not well thought through, just going along with life, you know, and just saying yes.
But I think that's also an entrepreneurial trait, right? Sometimes being a bit naive to just like, oh yeah, let's see what happens. Let's give it a try and not think about everything that could potentially go wrong.
Yeah, I agree. It was easier to do what I did 20 years ago than if I had to do it now. I'd be more scared now, probably. When I start new businesses, I'm more scared now than before, for sure.
Right. And how did you start in the company? What was your first role when you joined the company, the family business?
So I joined really entry-level job, you know, the first level in the company, planning events, basically. So we could say in summary, I know I did all the jobs along the way. So that's a big advantage, I feel, because I really have a good feeling for every part of the business.
Yeah, you got to know everything, basically. And that's also an interesting part, right? You're the world's largest conference organizer, which is crazy if you think about the scope and the size of your company. How did that focus then also change over time? Because today you have multiple more business offerings on top of the conference.
So that's entrepreneurship, right? You always have to innovate, always to look at how the market is changing, and all our evolutions and our new ventures are about go-to-market strategies, about new angles that have developed. And we were hungry. You know, we simply like to build. So we started new lines, new verticals. And last year, so I created the group, really. So that's now the platform that we call it, to create kind of a startup mentality.
Well, we're going to talk more in more detail about that in a second. When you were working alongside your father, you moved through the different departments at MCI Group. Was it easy to work in the family business, or sometimes harder than even having a normal employee, not a family member?
I never felt any particular difficulty working in the family business. I kind of mentioned high level. So my father is my dad, but then we had always a lot of fun together. So he's also one of my best friends, and we were business partners. So all of that was together, and there was a lot of respect all the time. And I think this is something where I was lucky that my family was able to have a lot of respect for all the teams, and it applied to me as well.
Yeah. So it came very natural to you in that regard.
It with hindsight, it was very natural, very natural.
Then in 2010, you actually took over the CEO role from your dad. Was that something that has always been planned that way?
I mean, yes and no, because, it was kind of, I would say if you would ask anyone in the company who was with us back then, they would say, it's the obvious, is what, family businesses do. Yeah. But then, it took a few years for me to prove also the roles little by little, progressing in the company. And at the point when we did the transition, I believed it came naturally, but it doesn't mean there was no prep work, right? I did have a strategy very clear, organized, planned, and, some very specific steps that we have designed.
Mm-hmm. And I can imagine that there's also some pressure. Of course, you're very motivated to take over the family business and lead it to new growth and new heights. But at the same time, taking over from your dad, I can imagine that's also quite some pressure involved there.
Probably. I'm going to say no, but probably I'm not saying the truth. I don't know, maybe I'm shy. Maybe it's because I try not to think about it, maybe. But there must be, of course, I want them to be proud. I want to... to have some success. So there's pressure, but there was motivation above that. I think that created my energy, and my motivation was probably above that pressure. So I didn't really feel it directly.
Got it. And how did you then manage that transition? Did your dad stay on board for a certain time to also support you? Or did you cut ties and say, hey, I take over the operational CEO role now, you got to stay out of the game? How did you manage that?
So, like I said, our process was pretty clear, and you hear stories always about family businesses where the transition of generation is difficult, and I would say for us it wasn't too much. So I always use the example, right? The first day when we had that discussion, one of my first action was to write a job description for my dad, because now he was going to work for me. Right. And not me for him. And it was very important, and this step, and I recommend it all the time. It was clear, where are you going to get involved, where are you not going to get involved, where do I need you, where do you need to take some actions, where you should not take some actions. And then I think where I'm saying I was lucky, and it's thanks to him, that he had the ability to step away. And that's not always easy for a founder to step away, and I think he had that special ability to be able to extract himself from some decisions that maybe he didn't agree, but he let me experience with. So this was, I say luck. It's it's his strategy.
That sounds like the perfect setup, because then you can leverage his knowledge and experience to support you in decisions where you're seeking support, but keep him out of the operational daily stuff where you say, hey, I got this. I don't need any additional input.
Right. That's the role of a chairman, and that's what we decided he does. And he did the role of a chairman. He didn't do the role of an ex-CEO. Right. And this was, his success.
So the role definition, the role description, the job description is something that you mentioned. Is there anything else that you would recommend to people who face a similar handover or transition from father to son?
I mean, the second key step that, the teams, I got feedback on that, right? So it's not my direct personal view, is I also immediately wrote a new business plan. So it was, which was a balance of building on the foundations of the past with a lot of respect, yet adding elements for the future and adapting to the current market. Yeah. So very quickly, immediately, I wrote a very clear business plan, visited all the teams, and really, worked with the teams on that business plan. It was not a solo work, right? Engaging with the teams, so they saw that I was a collaborative leader. And then, we really executed on that plan.
Wow. And your different department visits that you built over the years, that you really knew the company and understood the business behind it, that certainly helped to execute that. So perfect segue, because today you offer multiple services. You have 3 different areas that you focus on. Can you elaborate a bit more how you evolved from the pure conference organizing or conference event organizer to a more diversified group strategy.
Yeah, so what we realized, so this was linked, is the result of really COVID, because we were impacted quite highly and in a very specific manner. It was a true black swan, so something unexpected of gigantic proportion and so on, where we had to look at our assets because it was a moment of truth. And what we realized is, okay, we have MCI, the main agency that's global that everybody knows. But through the years, we did develop a little venture here and there, and it was basically creating a story with all of our assets. In a way before, and I will say it, it's like we had one kid, but actually we had more kids and we didn't love them as well, and that was unfair. So we really looked at our different businesses and we realized that we had 5-6 agency brands, so agencies giving professional service in the field of marketing, communication, events. We realized that we had built over years a couple of conventions, conferences that we owned or co-owned, so direct ownership. And then with COVID, a couple of opportunities to invest or to develop startups and accelerate them. So that's where I thought, okay, let's embrace that story and not hide it, because before we were hiding it, we were shy. Oh, MCI is the main company, everybody knows us. Those other things are smaller, maybe not as powerful, but it didn't matter. So it was really about embracing everything we know how to do and then, going to see the market and see if there's traction. And we're very happy we did that.
But that's also quite a bold move, right? Because you understand your core assets, but it's still with the size of your company and all the employees working for you. That's quite a shift to take. How do you make sure that you really onboarded people and got them to embark on that change?
My business is meeting people face to face, communicating, engaging, and creating a connection. So that's what I did. I met my teams, engaged, connected, and developed plans together. So that was really my strategy always. So maybe not so much digital, very analog process. But the process was really to also bring up a few key leaders in the most well-known business, MCI, which was structured. So we brought in a guy called Oscar, for example, as chief strategy officer on that business, which freed my time to spend more time with some of those other assets. And as we know, innovation has to be led by CEOs. So that's really what I applied in the company.
And in that regard, you mentioned the 3 different areas, right? You have the live and virtual events, you have the agency and communication business, and then also the new ventures / startups. How do you split the importance, or what is your biggest important business part of these 3?
So, it's what I said before. I don't have a favorite son, a favorite daughter, so I give my time equally to everybody, at least the mind share. Then in volume, of course, there's a split. Sure. And, we're pretty disciplined. I truly believe in disciplined actions. And it's about really going through a process of having key touch points with every part of the business, with forces, an interaction, a decision, co-working, and so on. So it's really through, I would say, disciplined execution that I'm able to manage all those different plans.
Right. And I imagine revenue-wise, it's probably clear which of the segments is the most important one. Is it still the live and virtual events part?
Sure, at the moment. So we're in the marketing and communication field, and we have a specialty in live events, and this is still the biggest part in revenue. But who knows in the future?
Do you see a shift happening more towards the new businesses that you create already? Or too early to tell?
It's not a competition between each. Again, that's my mindset. I'm not recreating a competition between the brands. Every brand is growing very nicely. But, of course, a brand that does 100 million, that grows 10%, adds more revenue than a brand of 1 million that adds 50% more. So, right? But the revenue is still live events, mostly on the MCI side. But we're starting to grow significantly the other brands as well.
And how does your business model look like for these different parts? Maybe you can elaborate on every single one of them, what your business model behind it looks like.
One business model is professional service model. So, we work for fees and time. Basically, we sell intellectual power, so human capital, to our clients, creativity, project management. That's kind of more the agency world. on the where we own our own convention, so that's a little bit more about being an owner, an entrepreneur, building a business that happens to be creating a platform in a field where people connect. But there you're really building a business. It's like a startup, really. You're building a business. And then in the venture side, that's something new we're learning, because there you don't necessarily have the majority. It's more you investing somewhere and you being a board member. And that's another business model, because you're trying to give advice, but you cannot do there's another entrepreneur building that business.
Right.
So that's something new we're learning there as well. So it's a nice mix of a more mature platform where we sell our time, being an owner operator, and finally more being an advisor. So it's quite interesting.
And investor as well, investor, of course.
Yeah.
Before, you also mentioned COVID, of course. Huge challenge for every event industry, of course. How did you actually face that from a psychological standpoint? You know, when everything just changes from today to tomorrow, can you take us a bit back to the time when you saw, oh, there's COVID coming, but maybe it's not in Switzerland yet? What were your initial thoughts when you heard about COVID the first time?
So we are a global business. So we were lucky in the sense that we were impacted right away because we operated in China and so on. So we really saw the wave come to us and, ending in the US. So really from east to west. Yeah. So we saw the wave. So we had some form of preparation little by little, because we had to act very fast in one part of the world. And then we're seeing the wave happen. But what happens is, we went into a bubble. So first of all, really working as a team very, very closely, a lot of teamwork, a lot of being there for each other, really working in a bubble. The first wave, to be honest, it's, we were like, okay, we're not going to do a lot of work for 3 months. We have a good balance sheet. We have some cash. Okay, we'll lose money for 3 months and then we'll just move on. Then that's June, then the summer happens, second wave in the fall. Then, you're like, oh shit, excuse my French.
No, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa. So this is going to become complicated. But again, what we start to see at that moment is that we had always a strategy to have really loyal and big clients and not work on project to project. So we always focused on long-term relationships with our customer. It was part of our business model. Yeah. And really, we saw that our customers that were with us a long time, they really trusted us and were also lost. Mm-hmm. So they were looking for advice and they came to us, and together we created ideas and we started to transform their communication and marketing strategies to the new realities. Yeah. So we, at the end of the day, we did, globally only minus 35%. That also made us realize our key assets, like I mentioned before, that we had other businesses that were not directly linked to events and that we could build on. So really, all the gems in the company, they rose. And then we just took advantage of that and, step by step with patience, because it was long, rebuild the business. And, now we're seeing the profits again and we're growing again, double-digit growth. So really excited.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, but that was a tough time for sure.
It was a tough time. And a time of it was a bit the yin and the yang, right, moment, because there's some very deep problematic moments and some high joy moments. So, for example, I had a son during that period, so having a kid, right? So it's really this mix of between your life and work. You see how important everything is together. And for me, my number one lesson was teamwork. It's be there one for another and never stay alone. One of my key strategies in this period was when I was feeling really down, I went to the office, and there was always maybe only 1 or 2 people, but you had a coffee machine and you just see somebody and you can relate and you can support each other. And that was really powerful for me.
I can imagine. And how do you protect your business, from a also financial standpoint? You mentioned you have a good balance sheet, but then after 3 months and hoping that this will go over fast, you suddenly realize, hey, maybe this is staying a bit longer than we all expected. What were some short, maybe also mid to long-term measures that you took to also protect the company from a financial standpoint? So
I would say probably 3 things that come to mind, not to talk too much.
Sure.
The first part was, our solid balance sheet allowed us to live more than 3 months with no business. So it was solid. We don't distribute dividends, so we keep the cash. We have really an investment strategy, so we had reserves, and we really build on that. The second part is, I remember it was maybe 25 years ago, something like that. I was at the entrepreneurship dinner, and there was this old man next to me, 80-something years old. And he and I know dinner of networking, and I remember my whole life this story, because otherwise, this guy with a lot of experience that builds all kinds of business, and he said, Sebastien, when everything is good, that's when you negotiate a lot of money from the banks. Mm-hmm. So I always had that in mind. And basically, our company, we had structured a lot of credit lines through our history with banks. Yeah. So this allowed us to pool a lot of cash flow immediately, like just instantly. So that means already cash was not my number one problem.
And that's a huge win, right?
That's a huge win. Yeah. That's a huge win.
Wow.
So this was the historical balance sheet, even more because of that ability to have strong cash, and then you're not worried during every night, are you going to be able to pay people? And then the third part, which this is the less fun, I mean, we just reacted very quickly and just restructured the business. We didn't have a choice. I have a few friends, sadly, that had bankruptcies. And I always call them, because I always want, that's the US learning. You always try to learn from others in the US mindset. So I always call them. And all of them said, if I had to do one thing over when I went bankrupt, was to act faster. So for me, this is always something also I had in my mind when there's a shift. Mm-hmm. You act fast. Yeah. And so that's what we did. We acted really fast in restructuring, looking at areas of the business that were going to be resilient, less resilient. Where's their waste? Where should we invest? Because it was not only about cutting costs, it was also about investing. For example, creative teams. We hired creative teams because with our customers who were lost, they needed ideas. Yep. So we hired creative teams. But on the execution side, the volumes were not the same, so we needed less teams. Mm-hmm. So execution very fast. This was key.
And I think these learnings, now, of course, you experienced them during COVID, but these learnings are universally applicable. So no matter what crisis or challenge comes up, that's the right mindset, right? And that probably also makes you stronger and more resilient.
Be well-funded, right? We're talking about entrepreneurship. Yeah. Be well-funded and execute super fast. And yes, strategy is important too, but probably at that moment, we didn't think too much about strategy, right? Sure. It was execution.
Absolutely. Another thing I want to talk about is your company growth. So initially, when your family business started, founded by your father, you grew from 30 people to now more than 2,000 employees all over the globe. Mm-hmm. How do you manage this growth as a family business? I mean, from knowing every employee by first name probably to having global employees and not having a single chance to know every one of them. How do you manage that from an operational but also from a cultural perspective?
I mean, you manage it step by step. That's the most important, I think, at the end of the day. But what often, my reaction is that first is that we wanted a big business that's global. We didn't, it didn't happen because we had a great product and then we were running after business. We worked hard. We were clear of what we wanted to do. So we had a business in Switzerland. We wanted the same business in multiple countries. We were interested in having a global business. We didn't want to have a Swiss business in Switzerland. It was not something that excited us. So that means that's what makes it also easier, because what you want, it makes you happy.
You were very clear about that.
We were very clear about that. We wanted a global business. So then, step by step, how do you build a global business? Yeah. We use the same recipe that we had, if I can call it that, in Switzerland, which was great teams in the company, a connection with the market. It's where we spent always, being involved in our sector, basically. So joining industry associations, lobby groups that help the advancement of the sector. So we always spent a lot of time in our fields of work. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, a focus on customers. And global customers, if possible, because we knew those global customers could give us business in multiple countries. Right. So really using, great teams, being involved with purpose in your sector. So giving a lot of free time, basically, to the market. Mm-hmm. And then focusing on the big customers that were multinationals. that valued what we had to offer.
Yeah.
This was really what we did and multiplied, and it worked. And then it's just one country, second country, third country, fourth country. So just step by step after that. It's important to choose your priorities, I think. And sometimes when you have 5, you have to choose 2. And this, I think, we had the discipline. Again, I would come back. Maybe it's our Swiss mindset, the clockwork philosophy, just to go step by step.
Yeah. The way that you say it, it sounds almost simple, but I know it's not. So you have to get a few things very, very right to get to the point where you are today. I could imagine one key thing is the cultural aspect, that you have the right people because the teams are so important for your business. How do you shape and also ingrain the culture when you grow as a company to 2,000 plus employees?
So very good question. So this is not my design. So this was my father's design. But if I summarize it, is you don't make money if you don't invest money, basically. And what he did at the very beginning, when we decided to go international, we created what I would call the headquarter office: head of finance, head of people and culture, head of marketing, head of solutions, head of client. And this is very expensive because you're building basically a non-productive team. That means not working with customers. Yeah. But that team was basically developing the platform. Make sure we had standards in finance, standards in recruitment, standards in marketing, that the brands was the same everywhere in the world, using the same website, the same marketing, the same words, that the employment contracts, the remuneration philosophy was the same, and so on and so on. And this was how we could scale fast. Because since we had the infrastructure, it was a little bit like, a plug and play situation. You find a new business or you start up the business, and there's a clear way of how we're going to work. So this was, I think, a key element of the success, was deciding to invest in the platform rather than taking money out of the business to buy a nice car.
Absolutely.
Right. So
very important mindset to get the basis right, and that means investing without any immediate return, but which allows you to grow much bigger later down the road instead of everything falling apart when you try to scale.
Exactly right.
One other thing I want to talk about with you is sustainability. You mentioned that, the Vision Horizon 2025 on your website. How is the sustainability an important aspect for your business and for the future? Why is it so important to you and your business?
So ESG is super important to the world, and climate change. We went from COVID, the first C, to conflict, the second C, and the real C is climate change that we have to deal with now. So all those are relatively easy, but climate is super hard. And we embarked on that journey more than 10 years ago. Again, it's at a dinner, I met somebody, I network a lot, that talked to me about environment and so on. I saw Al Gore at one of his first speeches. You all know that he did a lot for climate awareness and so on. And I was at one of his first events, just by networking, somebody invited me, and I said, okay, we have to do something about that. So we dedicated resources, a team member very passionate about that, and created a team of passionate talents in our company. And really they developed step by step a vision, and steps, signing commitments. And then we realized that naturally, as a global business, we were diverse by definition already, in terms of course, gender because of our field, but also geographically and so on. So culturally, very diverse. And we really invested a lot in that. We realized we're in an industry where what we create is ephemeral, by definition. So we try to look at better ways to do our job. There's a lot of print historically, so slowly we moved to digital and so on. So really we applied everything possible, following the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, really following that and selecting topics and really proactively elaborating plans. So it all started by networking, listening around, having a sense for what was going to happen, and then investing in resources. So again, invest in the change.
In that regard, do you think that companies, they have not only responsibility, but also a leverage, depending on the business model and area of business, of course, to really contribute more to that change, to the achievement of the sustainability goals?
So, of course, bigger companies have a lot of voice, of share of voice. And for us, we're a small company if you compare to ABB or other big companies. We're tiny, but we're a big company in my space. So I think, and I'm proud today, I can fairly say that we were a huge part of the sustainability movement in our industry, and they drove a lot of other followers, and I think I'm very proud of that.
It's just the beginning, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is
still
just
a lot
the
of
beginning.
work.
There's a lot of work.
Recently, you also participated in the Swiss Stock Exchange training program, the SPARX IPO Academy, which prepares companies for an IPO, obviously. And first of all, I want to know what actually motivated you to participate in that training.
So, I'm going to come back to, it's kind of a thread in our thing here, but at one networking event, I met somebody, an entrepreneur, and he told me, in life, you have to have a lot of options. And as a private company that is on a growth path, because we are interested in being always bigger, access to capital is one key element. And the listed markets is one way to raise capital. You can raise private money or public money.
Sure.
And I thought that I have a responsibility as a CEO, as in my job, to make sure the company has funding. So I need to understand deeply all what is available to us if we need to activate in a way or another. Yeah. So this was really the initial motivation was learning. Was learning.
Wow. And what did you take away from the program? Were there any key learnings or key takeaways?
So there's some good and some bad in there, right? If I start a little bit with the challenges, as you can imagine, being listed publicly, you have a responsibility to the public that invests. So to minority shareholders who don't necessarily understand all the business. So there's a lot of legal aspects which are really serious, but it's normal. And I respect that. I don't have a problem with that, but it's just something that's probably more intense than what I live as a private company. So this is something that I learned that needs to be organized. It's a question of organization. Yeah. Now, the positive positive side is the access to capital is very fluid. Because of, for example, the legal and the disciplined way you have to manage a company, in exchange, you have some facilities, which is the access to capital. And I realized in times like COVID, at some point, I was thinking, even despite everything I said before, what if we need 5, 10, 15 million for the business?
Sure.
It's difficult to find that kind of money when you're a private company.
Yeah, when everyone wants it at the same time, right? Yeah.
And my industry is black flagged because we're in the eye of the cyclone. So nobody wants to invest in that space.
Of course.
I'll give you an example. I had one call with an investor because, again, I like to network. I'm always keeping contact with some investors. They told me, yes, we're very interested, but we're going to wait until you hit the rock bottom, and then we will put some money. And that's pretty tough to hear. So they've been waiting for you to be there. So probably I would think as a public company, you probably have more support from your shareholders and have ways to raise money that is more fluid than in a private way. So this is very attractive.
Absolutely. Now, do you have any plans after the program? You learned, you understand, you want to have the options available. Do you have any immediate actions where you say, hey, now we're going to prepare as we would go public, or you actually do want to go public? What are your plans after the program?
So we discussed a lot internally the program because I brought a lot of the learnings. The program is really well done. You go with your CFO actually, so it's a team, and that was I think it's very smart. So already I'm not alone in listening, so we can debrief at 2 and then we can talk with the teams. Okay. So our immediate next step is not tomorrow. We're coming out of COVID. The situation is we're still in the rebuild phase. We're still installing a couple of elements, and I believe also one of the learnings of going into the IPO learning process with SPARX and SIX Group was that you also need a tight narrative and a tight story. And right now, probably the storytelling is not ideal. It's probably too soon after COVID because, for example, I speak with some investors and they tell me, oh, but you are in a volatile business. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but no, I don't agree at all. Our business is volatile. Yeah. COVID hit us strong. Yes, COVID hit us, but it doesn't mean I'm a volatile business.
Right.
If there's a virus, I'm impacted. But
Sure.
when there was the financial crisis the last time, we grew by 50%. Between 2007 and 2009, we grew the business by 50%. So that crisis didn't impact us.
Yeah.
So I'm still fighting some of that, and I feel it's too difficult to fight those negative perceptions. So it's probably not the right timing at the moment.
Right. And especially you as a global company, right? You have different stock exchanges where you could go public. Right. So what would you gain from going public on Sparks or the SIX main market here in Switzerland?
So it's interesting because a few years ago, I was looking a little bit at the markets already, and I clearly realized that second market is probably more right for my type of business, so mid-cap kind of company. And it didn't exist in Switzerland, actually.
Right.
So I was looking at, for example, there was AIM in the UK. There is also in Paris, they also have a second market stock exchange. I just forgot the name. And then when I saw Spark, I was like, oh, wow, that's cool, because still my headquarters are in Switzerland.
Right.
So I said, I need to understand more. So it's a new opportunity, very attractive for mid-cap, a lot of easier way to report because, we don't have the resources of, again, like an ABB or Swisscom, for example. So that's when, I got a little bit more interested in exploring again.
Fantastic. And maybe to wrap the IPO topic up, you mentioned already two, one advantage, one disadvantage. Advantage, of course, access to more capital and also more liquidity in that regard. Disadvantage, more legal obligations. What are other advantages and disadvantages that you got to know in the program of going public?
So I don't know if it's an advantage or disadvantage, but and for me it's not very difficult because I like it. But I always try to be very public as a CEO because I believe that what I try to do is that clients call me and not me call clients. So for me, by making noise, participating at a podcast like today, and doing other actions like that, becoming public, I generate visibility. And so I think there's a readiness there for me in that market. But I know some friends, entrepreneur CEO, who are not necessarily extroverts, I would say. And that would probably be painful for them. So again, every company has a different context. So this is kind of plus and minus depending where you sit. But there's definitely a public aspect to it. Yeah. If we look at the Swiss market in particular, I think the Swiss market is historically used to a few really big caps. So the fear is a little bit maybe being lost as a mid-cap in a market with really big caps. That's something we discussed at length and so on. There's answers, but in a way there are questions to be conscious about from that point of view.
Got it. If we now look into the future, you have a presence in more than 60 cities worldwide. That's, crazy, like a real global company. What are your plans for the future? What will be, your milestones, your goals for the next few years to come?
So the milestone, I think, I kind of hinted into that before. Your question was leading almost there. Probably do as much revenue outside of the live event industry than we do inside the live event industry. Because, like I said, we believe our capabilities are to support companies with marketing and their communication. Live event is only one of the ways to create engagement with your customers, your employees, your stakeholders. Right. And we believe there are other means. There are other means like digital, for example. We're looking at Web3. We're looking at add-on services in terms of augmentation of content and content development for our clients as well. That would be a key milestone. We used to have the milestone of doing as much revenue outside of Switzerland than in Switzerland. And that we passed, I don't know what year, but we passed it. And now probably the next one will be to have this 50-50 balance between live event revenue and non-live event revenue.
It also brings you back to what you said initially, right? Where you said there is an important balance between working and playing. Correct. So this is also a very important thing about balance. So it seems balance is a key thing in your life, in business and private life.
Yes, I think it is. And it's how everything integrates together also. Because balance alone is not, because it's not one or the other. The whole point is how everything together and connected creates the perfect scenario.
Absolutely. Seb, to wrap up today's episode, we have some rapid fire questions for you. So I either give you a short question or different options to choose from. and you have to answer in one sentence.
Okay.
You ready?
Okay.
First one, Switzerland, the US, or Canada?
Switzerland. I love Switzerland.
Beer or wine?
Red wine.
Nice. Beach or mountains?
That's difficult. If I have to choose, mountains.
Which mountain, if you had to choose one?
I mean, the Alps are amazing, but, it's just so close by. Why go elsewhere?
Yeah. How many hours of sleep did you get last night?
By 10:30, 11 to 6. So that's 7 hours, 7.5. Yeah.
Perfect. What do you wish you had done differently in your career, if there's anything?
No, I never think that way. I look into the future always. The past is the past, and then next.
Yeah. And the last one for you today, Geneva or Zurich?
Zurich for party and Geneva for life.
That's a good one. Seb, thank you so much for coming on the show. Lots of success and all the best. And we're super excited to see where you're going and where you're bringing the MCI group.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.